The night nurse thought she imagined it. A flutter of fingers. A breath too deep. But what came next, what the patient said when she woke up, would ripple through generations and change everything a young doctor thought she knew about family, forgiveness, and herself. Dr. Nia Roberts was just 29, top of her med school class, the first black woman in her residency cohort, and already burning out. She spent her nights pacing the fluorescent-lit hallways of Vance Memorial Private Hospital in Atlanta, working the graveyard shift. It wasn't glamorous, no glory cases, no headlines, but it paid her loans, kept her afloat, gave her something to hold on to as the weight of expectation, exhaustion, and isolation threatened to pull her under. Then came the assignment. Room 614. Evelyn Vance, the billionaire widow, in a coma, no visitors, no press, no drama, supposedly. But from the moment Nia stepped into that room, something shifted. Not clinically, spiritually. The air carried a strange stillness, like something was holding its breath. Evelyn lay motionless beneath starched white sheets, her silver hair combed each morning by unseen hands, her face obscured by a ventilator mask. Everything about her was precise, pristine, frozen in time. And yet, she didn't look like a woman dying. She looked like someone waiting. Nia tried to shake the feeling. Coma patients often lingered in that in-between. It wasn't uncommon, but this was different. There was something ancient beneath the antiseptic quiet, something watching. Then one night, around 3:12 a.m., as Nia changed Evelyn's bandages under the soft of the machines, she saw it. A mark, small, faded, inked just beneath the ribs, hidden beneath layers of paper-thin skin and sterile gauze. It was no surgical tattoo or accidental scar. It was intentional, a symbol. Nia's breath caught. Her gloved hand hovered midair as memories surged like lightning. She knew that mark. It was an ancient West African fertility symbol. Her grandmother used to draw in the red dirt outside their house in Savannah, whispering stories of women who healed, who waited, who held entire bloodlines in silence. Stories of ancestors, of villages erased, of power lost and buried under centuries of shame and silence. But what was it doing here? On a billionaire white woman in Atlanta who lay silent, surrounded by wealth, machinery, and mystery? Nia's hands trembled. The room was suddenly too quiet, too still, as if something old had just stirred awake beneath the hum of monitors. And the question whispered louder than ever. Who was Evelyn Vance, really? And why did she bear the mark of Nia's ancestors? Over the next 2 weeks, sleep became a distant memory. Nia moved through her shifts in a daze, her body present, but her mind caught in a restless loop. That symbol haunted her, not just the shape of it, but what it meant. It pulsed in her thoughts like a heartbeat out of time, like something ancient calling her name. She couldn't let it go. When the hospital slowed during the early morning lull, she began researching Evelyn Vance's history on the staff computer, quietly, cautiously. What she found was polished, predictable. Born into old Southern money, the only daughter of Walter and Miriam Vance, heiress to Vance Cotton, once the most powerful textile empire in Georgia. Articles showcased Evelyn at debutante balls, charity galas, political fundraisers. Photos painted her as a pillar of genteel society. But beneath the lace and legacy, the cracks began to show. The deeper Nia dug, the stranger it got. Old census records didn't match up. One year, Evelyn was listed as living in Savannah. The next, nowhere. Her medical records before 1980 were mysteriously absent. Her parents' death certificates were sealed. There were no known children, no siblings, no surviving relatives. She was officially the end of a line. And yet, that mark, Nia felt it pressing against her chest like a buried stone. Something was being hidden, something far older than money, far deeper than privilege. She started to suspect that Evelyn Vance wasn't just a relic of the Old South. She was the South, a living artifact of a history rewritten in velvet and silence. One night, unable to bear the weight of questions, Nia brought her grandmother's diary to work, the one wrapped in worn leather and tied with a fraying red ribbon. Her grandmother, Dear, had been a midwife, a root healer, a keeper stories most people were too afraid to write down. Inside the fragile pages were drawings of tribal markings, fertility signs, ancestral scripts, symbols passed down from women who had birthed generations in the shadows. And there it was, the symbol, drawn in careful strokes, identical to the one inked beneath Evelyn's ribs. Beside it, Deer had written a single line in her looping script, passed down from enslaved midwives in Georgia, marked the bloodline of the Vance house. Hidden in plain sight. Nia's throat tightened, marked the bloodline. She reread the phrase over and over as the hospital walls closed in around her. Could it be? Could Evelyn, this alabaster-skinned Southern widow lying silent in room 614, share a bloodline with her? It didn't seem possible. And yet, something inside her already knew. It wasn't just a coma patient Nia was tending to. It was history itself, buried, disguised, but still breathing. And now it had chosen her to uncover it. Then it happened. A storm rolled in from the south, rattling the windows of Vance Memorial with deep, growling thunder. Rain lashed the panes like a warning, wind howling down the corridors as if the past itself had come knocking. The lights flickered, once, twice, before the hospital's backup generator kicked in with a low mechanical groan. Everything dimmed. The world outside vanished into blackness. Inside room 614, Nia sat alone in the low amber glow of emergency power. The steady beeping of Evelyn's monitors seemed louder now, more insistent. Nia had grown used to the silence between them, the one-sided conversations, the long, quiet hours spent adjusting machines, changing dressings, smoothing Evelyn's hair. But tonight felt different, thicker, charged. She didn't even realize she was speaking aloud. "You're just a woman, aren't you?" she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, eyes fixed on Evelyn's face. Not a myth, not a monster, just old and tired. And then Evelyn's hand twitched, a flicker, no more than a tremor, but it sent lightning through Nia's spine. She froze. The air turned electric. Her gaze shot at Evelyn's face, just as her lips moved, softly, slowly, delicately cracking the silence that had cloaked her for months. "Nia," she whispered. Nia's heart pounded in her chest. She stumbled forward, half in shock, thinking it was a fluke, the confusion of a body surfacing from deep sedation. But then Evelyn spoke again. "Forgive me." The words carried weight, not confusion, not delirium. Guilt, recognition, a plea from someone who had been waiting a long time to be heard. Nia leaned in, unsure whether to call for help or stay locked in that impossible moment. Her breath caught as Evelyn's eyes opened slowly, clouded with age but focused. And then came the bombshell. "I named you," Evelyn said. Nia blinked. "What?" Evelyn's lips trembled. "Your mother, her name was Ada. She was mine." Time stopped. For a long second, the thunder outside fell away, and all Nia could hear was the rush of blood in her ears. She stared at Evelyn, this pale, powerful woman who had once stood at the pinnacle of Southern wealth, and suddenly saw her not as a stranger, but as a final thread in a story sewn centuries ago. The silence broke. Nia's voice was sharp, disbelieving, trembling. "What do you mean she was yours?" But deep inside, something already knew the answer. Something ancient had just awakened. Evelyn's voice was barely more than a breath, brittle and strained from disuse. But her memory was razor-sharp. As the storm raged outside, she confessed everything. It began when she was 17. She had fallen in love. Not with a banker or a senator's son, but with James Holloway, a black jazz musician she met during a summer trip to New Orleans. He played like the trumpet was stitched to his soul, and he looked at her like she was more than porcelain, more than a debutante. For a few stolen months, they lived in a dream, a reckless, dangerous dream. But the South always wakes you up. When her father discovered the affair, the consequences were swift and violent. He beat her, locked her in the attic, and spread the lie that she'd miscarried. But Evelyn had still been carrying life inside her. A black midwife, a woman whose name Evelyn never forgot, helped her flee under cover of night. They made it as far as Mississippi, where, in a clapboard house behind a chapel, Evelyn gave birth to a daughter, She named her Ada. She held her for just one night. Then her father found them. He didn't kill the midwife. He bought her silence, paid her to hide the baby, threatened death if Evelyn ever spoke a word. And just like that, Evelyn was dragged back to Savannah, drugged, locked away for weeks. When she awoke fully, her parents told her the baby had died during the night. The funeral had already taken place. There was no grave, no proof, just silence. But Evelyn never stopped searching. For years, she hunted through shadows, hospitals, orphanages, social worker ledgers. Always just a step too late. She funded clinics in black neighborhoods, built schools, created scholarships, all in the name of public good. But privately, they were her trail of breadcrumbs, her penance, a way to leave something behind for the daughter the world had stolen. "I lived decades in silence," she whispered, her eyes glassy with memory. "And no one would have believed me. No one wanted to believe that the Vance name could bleed black." Nia's knees weakened, her grip tightening on the bed rail as her world tilted. "I found your mother once," Evelyn continued, her voice cracking. She was walking out of a church in Macon. She was laughing. She looked so happy. She had a little girl clinging to her dress. "I think it was you." She paused, swallowing hard. "I didn't want to ruin it." Nia stood frozen, unable to speak. The truth had weight, not just emotional, but physical. It pressed against her chest like a slab of stone, like every piece of her past had just cracked open to reveal another story buried inside. Finally, she found her voice. It came out low, trembling, sharp at the edges. "You could have said something," she whispered. "We lived in poverty." She died without answers. She thought she was abandoned. Evelyn broke. Not the quiet, dignified tears of an old woman trying to preserve her grace, but the guttural, shaking sobs of someone whose guilt had finally surfaced. She wept for the first time in 40 years. Not for herself, but for Ada, for Nia, for what could never be undone. And outside, thunder rolled through Atlanta like a reckoning. Later that night, as the rain softened and the hospital settled into its eerie hum, Evelyn made her final request. She asked Nia to stay quiet. In exchange, she offered everything. Not just hush money, not just a well-funded scholarship or a secret trust. Evelyn offered her the name, full legal control of the Vance estate, its assets, properties, and legacy. Billions, if managed right. And more than wealth, influence. The kind that moved laws in Georgia, shaped headlines, shifted power structures. The Vance name opened doors that had been locked for generations. "Vance means power in this state," Evelyn whispered, voice shaking but clear. "If you take it, you can turn it into something good, something your mother would have been proud of." The offer struck like a slap. Nia recoiled. The room felt colder. Blood money. That's what it was. A fortune built on backs like her grandmother's, on stolen lives and silenced names. Could she truly accept it? Even to rewrite the ending? Could she wear the name of the family that once owned hers? She didn't answer. Instead, she went home. The storm followed her there, not the one outside, but the one inside. She screamed into pillows, punched walls, tore through her closet until her hands bled. Her chest heaved with a fury she didn't know she carried. Rage for her mother, for the lies, for the empty stomachs and broken dreams. For Ada died without ever knowing why. At dawn, hollow-eyed and shaking, Nia drove to the cemetery. She stood in front of her grandmother's headstone, weathered humble, flanked by wildflowers growing through cracks in the earth. In her hands, she held a diary, the same one that had started all of this. She knelt slowly, brushing away the dew from the engraved letters, and placed the diary at the foot of the stone. Then, in a whisper so soft it almost disappeared into the wind, she said, "Tell me what to do." There was no sign, no flash of light, just stillness, the kind that settles deep in your bones. But it was enough. In that silence, she felt her grandmother's presence, not guiding her, trusting her. And when the morning sun broke through the clouds, Nia rose with decision in her chest like a flame. She returned to the hospital with a different fire in her eyes. Whatever came next, she wouldn't run from it. She would claim her truth and shape it. The press conference was held on the courthouse steps, the same marble stairs where, decades earlier, black mothers had been turned away and white names had decided the shape of Southern history. Now, cameras flashed, reporters leaned in, and the city held its breath. Dr. Nia Roberts stood tall behind the podium, dressed in navy blue with her mother's pennant around her neck and fire in her voice. "My name," she began, her tone calm but unshakable, "is Nia Holloway. And today, I claim what was stolen generations ago. Not for revenge, but for rebirth." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some clapped. Some stood frozen in disbelief. The Vance name had loomed like a monument in Georgia's elite circles, untouchable, untarnished. Until now, Nia didn't take the name. She refused to carry the weight of a lineage that had built its power on silence and suffering. But she did take the legacy, and she reshaped it in her mother's image, in her grandmother's memory, in her own blood and truth. Evelyn, frail but lucid in her final weeks, signed everything over to a newly formed trust, created under Nia's guidance. The Ada Holloway Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing health care, housing, and education to black women and families across the South, beginning in the very neighborhoods the Vance family once displaced. Clinics were opened, scholarships endowed, midwifery centers revived, honoring the traditions Evelyn once tried to erase, and Nia now vowed to protect. 2 months later, Evelyn passed away quietly in her hospital bed. She requested no funeral, no monument, no headlines, just peace. She was buried in an unmarked grave outside of Savannah, not far from where she had given birth to Ada so many years ago. No speeches, no marble. Only one item was placed gently on her chest before the dirt covered her, a folded note, weathered and soft at the edges. Inside, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "To the healer I never got a raise, but always dreamed of." 1 year later, under a bright Georgia sun, the first Holloway Medical Clinic opened its doors in Macon. The building stood proudly on land that once held sorrow, the former site of the Vance family's sprawling cotton warehouse, where generations had labored in chains. Now rose a sanctuary of healing, knowledge, and dignity. Crowds gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony, elders in Sunday hats, children with wide eyes, nurses in crisp uniforms, and young black girls holding their mothers' hands. Some wept quietly. Others stood in reverent silence, sensing the weight of what had been reclaimed. At the front of the courtyard stood a bronze statue. It depicted a young black girl, barefoot but unbowed, holding a stethoscope in one hand and a worn book of African symbols in the other. Her head was held high, eyes fixed on the horizon. She was a child of two worlds, the ancestral and the modern, embodying both heritage and possibility. Etched into the base were the words, "To those who were silenced and those who now speak." Inside, the clinic was bright and warm, filled with murals, family photos, and art donated by local students. But in the main hallway, mounted in quiet honor, hung a single sepia-toned portrait. Ada, Nia's mother. She stood in mid-laugh, eyes crinkled, arms folded like she knew a secret the world hadn't caught up to yet. She was no longer just a memory. She was the face of a movement. Her smile greeted every patient who walked through the doors, reminding them that healing didn't begin with machines or prescriptions. It began with being seen. And in a small office at the back of the clinic, surrounded by letters, charts, and the scent of coffee and lavender, Dr. Nia Roberts sat alone for a moment. The weight of the past settled gently on her shoulders. She looked out the window, where sunlight danced across the statue, and whispered to no one in particular. Sometimes, healing doesn't start in the body. It starts in the blood.